The giant cowboy was loading feed in the heat of the afternoon, his broad shoulders hunched against the stairs that always seemed to follow him. Folks kept their distance. They always did. But when a lone woman appeared, dust curling at her boots and a hand resting on her pregnant belly, every eye turned. She stopped in front of him, straight-backed, calm, not a trace of fear. The town fell silent. Then she spoke. Quiet. Clear. "I'm the widow of the man you killed." Boone Hale didn't move. Couldn't, but instead of reaching for a gun, she asked for something else. By nightfall, they would leave together, every soul in town watching, whispering. And no one, least of all Boone, knew what storm was coming next. Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the main street of Copper Creek as Boone Hale's muscles strained under the weight of another feed sack. Dust caked his boots while sweat darkened his shirt between his shoulder blades. The routine task kept his mind quiet, just the way he preferred it. The whispers reached him first. Like a wave of silence washing over the street, the usual bustle of town life fell still. Boone looked up from his wagon to find the source of the disturbance. A woman approached, her dark blue dress neat despite the dusty wind. She walked with purpose, one hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. Her chin was held high, though Boone could see the slight tremor in her lower lip that betrayed her nervousness. The gossiping women outside the general store pressed closer together, their faces eager for the drama about to unfold. Even old Tom Jenkins stopped sweeping his porch to watch. The woman stopped a few paces from Boone's wagon. Up close, he could see the grief etched in the corners of her eyes, though her gaze was steady and clear. "I'm the widow of the man you killed." The words hit Boone like a physical blow. The feed sack slipped from his fingers, landing with a dull thud in the wagon bed. His throat went dry as summer grass. "Ma'am?" It was all he could manage. "My husband was Jebediah McVeigh." Her voice carried across the still street. "You shot him 3 years ago over some rustled cattle." Boone's hands gripped the wagon edge. That name! He hadn't spoken it since that terrible day, but it lived in his nightmares. The crack of gunfire, the look in Jebediah's eyes as he fell, the weight of the dead man's body as Boone carried him to the sheriff's office, hoping against hope that something could be done. "Mrs. McVeigh." Boone removed his hat, holding it against his chest. I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Hale." She cut him off, her words clipped but not cruel. "I need your help." Boone blinked, struggling to make sense of this turn. The town seemed to lean in, hungry for every word. "The railroad's been buying up land," Clara continued. "Those who won't sell find their claims challenged, their deeds questioned. As a widow." She paused, squaring her shoulders. "I'm an easy target. They'll be coming for Jeb's land next." Understanding dawned. Boone had heard whispers about the railroad's strong-arm tactics. Good folks being pushed off their land through legal trickery or worse. "What are you asking of me, Mrs. McVeigh?" "I need protection." Her hand pressed more firmly against her belly. "Someone who knows the law and isn't afraid to stand up to their bullies. Someone who—" Her voice caught slightly. "Someone who owes my husband a debt." The weight of that debt had pressed on Boone's conscience for 3 long years. He'd been cleared by the law. Self-defense, they'd ruled, but that hadn't eased his spirit any. "I have a line shack," he said quietly. "It's not much, but it's defensible. You'd be safe there while we sort this out." Clara nodded, relief flickering across her features. "When can we leave?" "Soon as I finish unloading these supplies." Boone glanced at the remaining feed sacks. "Won't take but a few minutes." The crowd watched as Clara stepped back, settling onto a bench outside the general store while Boone worked. Their eyes followed every movement, minds already spinning tales to spread across supper tables that evening. The sun was low in the sky when they finally left town. Clara perched on the wagon seat beside Boone. The line shack was an hour's ride away, and neither spoke much as they travelled. The clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of wagon wheels filled the silence. Inside the simple cabin, Boone moved with quiet efficiency. He built up the fire while Clara stood near the door, taking in the sparse but tidy interior. Her face showed nothing of what she thought about sharing space with the man who'd killed her husband. "I'll fix up the spare cot," Boone said, pulling fresh linens from a trunk. "It ain't much, but it's clean." "Thank you." Clara's voice was soft as she moved to warm herself by the fire. She lowered herself carefully onto a rough-hewn chair, extending her feet toward the flames. Boone worked methodically, aware of every small sound in the cabin: the pop of the fire, Clara's steady breathing, the whisper of fabric as she adjusted her shawl. The weight of their shared history hung heavy in the air between them. When he finished preparing the cot, he stood awkwardly by the door. "I'll sleep in the lean-to outside. Give you your privacy." Clara looked up, firelight dancing across her features. "Mr. Hale." He paused, hand on the door latch. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said quietly, "but I'm grateful for your help." Boone nodded once, unable to meet her eyes. "Get some rest, Mrs. McVeigh. Tomorrow's likely to be a long day." The pale light of dawn crept through the line shack's single window, painting the rough-hewn walls in soft greys. Clara McVeigh eased herself up from the cot, her back stiff from the thin mattress. Sleep had been elusive, her mind racing with thoughts of Jeb, the railroad, and the strange twist of fate that had brought her to seek help from her husband's killer. She moved carefully in the quiet cabin, one hand pressed against her lower back, while the other gathered kindling for the stove. The familiar motions of morning helped steady her nerves. Soon the iron kettle sat heating on the stovetop, promising coffee to chase away the lingering shadows of night. The door creaked open, and Boone ducked his tall frame through the entrance. He stopped short at the sight of Clara already up and moving about his space. "Mom," he said, removing his hat. "Didn't expect you'd be awake yet." "Early riser," Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Always have been." Boone shifted his weight, looking almost comically out of place in his own cabin. "Reckon you'll be needing things, supplies and such?" He gestured vaguely toward the sparse shelves. "I ain't used to having, that is, I don't keep much on hand for—" "A woman?" Clara supplied, allowing herself a small smile at his discomfort. "Yes." Boone reached for his coat. "I'll ride into town, get whatever you might need." After Clara gave him a short list, Boone saddled up and headed out. The morning sun caught his broad shoulders as he rode away, and Clara watched until he disappeared around the bend. Alone in the cabin, Clara's teacher's curiosity got the better of her. The shack was neat but Spartan, a few pieces of sturdy furniture, cooking implements, and a shelf of basic supplies. Near the window, a worn leather Bible caught her eye. Its pages were dog-eared, with passages marked by faded ribbon markers. As she lifted the Bible, a photograph slipped from between its pages. The image showed two young men in their Sunday best, Boone, looking less weathered but just as solemn, and beside him, a shorter man with laughing eyes and an easy smile. "Brothers," Clara guessed, noting the similar set of their jaws. The back of the photo bore a simple inscription: "Thomas Hale, gone home to glory, 1875. Clara carefully returned the photo to its place. The Bible and the brothers' photograph humanized Boone in a way that made her uncomfortable. It was easier when he was just the man who'd killed Jeb. The sound of hoofbeats announced Boone's return near midday. He carried in supplies and a troubled expression. "Town's buzzing," he said, setting down the packages. "Railroad syndicate's been busy. Bought out the Miller place yesterday, and word is they're pressing hard on the Widow Chen's claim." He paused, watching Clara's reaction. "Sheriff Lathrop's backing them. Says it's all legal and proper-like." Clara's hands clenched in her skirts. "That man wouldn't know proper if it kicked him in the teeth." She crossed to where her traveling satchel lay beside the cot. "There's something you need to see." From the satchel's hidden pocket, Clara withdrew a thick envelope, its edges soft with age. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the document inside. "Jeb wasn't just farming that land," she explained, smoothing the paper on the table. "He filed a water rights claim for the entire valley." Boone leaned in, his expression intense as he studied the document. "This is official?" "Filed with the territorial office." Clara nodded. Every stream, every spring from the North Ridge to the South Fork. Jeb knew water would be worth more than gold once the territory opened up. Her voice softened with pride. "He was always thinking ahead, my Jeb." Boone straightened, running a hand through his hair. "This changes everything. Railroad can't run their lines without water access. They'd have to negotiate with each claim holder individually, pay fair prices instead of bullying folks off their land. Now you understand why I came to you." Clara met his gaze steadily. "This isn't just about protecting my claim. It's about the whole valley. Every family that's built a life here." The weight of the situation settled over the cabin. Boone moved to the window, staring out at the distant hills as if seeing them with new eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. 3 years ago, I thought I saw your husband draw first. Everything happened so fast, the shouts, the guns." He turned back to face her. "I've replayed that moment 1,000 times, wondering if I was wrong, if I could have done something different." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to listen. "I can't change what happened that day." Boone continued. "But maybe I can help make things right. Not just for you, but for everyone in the valley." The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the water rights deed on the table between them. A piece of paper that now represented not just a widow's claim, but the future of an entire community. The setting sun painted long shadows across the weathered boards of Preacher Josiah Gray's modest home. Boone's wagon creaked to a stop, and he helped Clara down, mindful of her condition. The old circuit preacher stood waiting on his porch, silhouetted by the warm glow of oil lamps within. "Brother Hale." Preacher Gray's voice carried the weight of years spent preaching across the territory. "It's been too long." His eyes crinkled with recognition as they fell on Clara. "And Sister McVeigh. My heart grieved when I heard about Jebediah." Clara clasped the preacher's offered hands. "Thank you for seeing us so late, preacher." "The Lord's work knows no hour," he replied, ushering them inside. The parlor was humble but welcoming, well-worn furniture arranged around a pot-bellied stove. Books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded from frequent use. Preacher Gray settled into his favorite chair, the leather creaking beneath him. "Now then, what brings you both to my door? Town's already buzzing about the widow McVeigh seeking shelter with Boone Hale." Boone remained standing, his large frame casting a shadow on the wall. "You baptized my family, preacher. My brother Thomas always said you were a man who could be trusted with hard truths." The mention of Thomas softened the preacher's weathered features. He was a fine young man. God rest his soul. Clara leaned forward, her hands folded protectively over her belly. "Preacher, the railroad's buying up land all through the valley, but they're not just buying, they're threatening, pressuring folks who won't sell. Sheriff Lathrop's backing them," Boone added, "using his badge to intimidate honest folk." The preacher's expression darkened. "I've heard whispers. The widow Chen came to me yesterday, crying about men threatening to burn her orchards if she wouldn't sign over her deed." Clara withdrew the water rights document from her satchel, explaining its significance. Preacher Gray studied it through his wire-rimmed spectacles, nodding slowly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he mused. "This document could be our David Stone against Goliath." He looked up at them both. "But you'll need more than paper to stand against the railroad. They've already bought most of the town council." "Then we'll find those who haven't been bought," Clara declared, her voice carrying the same commanding tone she'd used in her schoolroom. "There must be others willing to stand for what's right." Boone watched her, something stirring in his chest at her fierce determination. It reminded him of Thomas, who'd never backed down from defending the defenseless. "I can help," Preacher Gray offered. "I hear confessions from folks all up and down this valley. I know who still holds to their principles." He paused, considering. "The widow Chen, for one, and old Marcus Wheeler out by Copper Creek. He's turned down 3 offers from the railroad already." "We'll need to move careful like," Boone cautioned. "Railroad men ain't known for playing fair when crossed." Clara straightened in her chair. "I won't be bullied off my land. Jeb died believing in the future of this valley. I aim to see that future secured." The preacher's eyes moved between them, thoughtful. "The good book tells us there is strength in numbers. Together you might have a chance." He rose slowly, joints creaking. "I'll speak to those I trust. Arrange meetings quiet-like." As they prepared to leave, Boone hung back. "One more thing, preacher. I aim to teach Mrs. McVeigh to shoot, for protection." Clara's head snapped up in surprise, but she didn't object. The preacher nodded gravely. "These are dangerous times. The Lord helps those who help themselves." The ride back to the line shack was quiet, each lost in thought. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the prairie grass. Coyotes called in the distance, their lonely songs echoing across the valley. Inside the shack, Clara built up the fire while Boone laid out his bedroll on the floor. "You don't have to sleep down there," Clara said softly. "The cot's yours." "Wouldn't be proper," Boone replied, settling onto his blankets. "Besides, I've slept on worse." Clara sat on the edge of the cot, studying him in the firelight. "Why did you offer to teach me to shoot?" Boone was quiet for a long moment. "Because I won't always be around to protect you, and every person has the right to defend what's theirs." Their eyes met across the dim room, and something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. They were no longer just a widow and her husband's killer, but allies in a fight bigger than their shared past. "Good night, Mr. Hale," Clara said, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Good night, Mrs. McVeigh," Boone replied, watching the firelight dance across the ceiling. The night settled around them, full of possibility and uncertainty. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the promise of change on its breath. The first rays of sunlight crept over the eastern hills, painting the creek valley in soft golden hues. Morning dew sparkled on the prairie grass as Boone led Clara to a quiet spot where cottonwoods provided shade along the meandering water. Boone placed 6 tin cans on a fallen log 20 paces away. The metal surfaces gleamed in the early light. He turned to Clara, holding out his Colt single-action revolver with reverence. "First rule, treat every firearm like it's loaded," he said, his voice low and steady. "Second rule, never point it at anything you don't aim to shoot." Clara accepted the weapon with both hands, surprised by its weight. Her fingers trembled slightly as they wrapped around the worn grip. "Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready," Boone instructed, stepping closer. "Here, adjust your stance." He demonstrated, feet shoulder-width apart. Strong foot back, weak foot forward. Clara mimicked his position, but her shoulders remained tense. Boone moved behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Relax your shoulders," he said softly. "Breathe easy. Line up the front sight with the rear notch." The morning air was cool against Clara's face as she squinted down the barrel. Her first shot went wide, startling a pair of meadowlarks into flight. "That's natural," Boone assured her. "The trigger pull takes getting used to. Try again." Shot after shot, Clara's aim improved under Boone's patient guidance. His calm instruction reminded her of teaching her own students, the way he broke down complex movements into simple steps, praising small improvements. "You're a good teacher, Mr. Hale," Clara said during a reload, watching him demonstrate the proper technique. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Had a good example. My brother Thomas taught me. said a man should know how to protect what matters, but never forget the weight of that responsibility. Clara studied his expression, seeing past the hardened exterior to the burden of memory he carried. Before she could respond, movement in the tall grass caught their attention. A woman emerged from the creek bed, her arms full of gathered plants. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and she moved with quiet dignity through the morning shadows. Clara's face brightened with recognition. "Nita Red Elk," she called out warmly. "I didn't expect to find you here." The Comanche woman approached, her keen eyes taking in the shooting practice scene. "The medicine plants are strongest at dawn?" she said, her English clear and measured. "I heard shots. You learn to defend yourself, Clara McVeigh." "These are dangerous times," Clara replied. "Mr. Hale is helping me prepare." Nita nodded, studying Boone with frank assessment. "I knew your husband," she told Clara. "Jebediah McVeigh was a man of his word. He understood the value of water to all people." Clara's hand instinctively went to the deed in her pocket. "Jeb told me about the agreement he made with your band. He promised to protect your access to the creek system." "Yes," Nita confirmed. "My people have gathered medicine here for generations. The water gives life to all, settler and Comanche alike." She shifted her bundle of plants. "But now the Iron Horsemen come with their paper promises and poison words." "The railroad's been pressing you too?" Boone asked, his voice carrying a note of concern. "They build fences across ancient paths," Nita said. "Drive away the buffalo. Tell us we have no right to water that sustained our grandmothers' grandmothers." Her expression hardened. "They do not understand. When the water dies, we all die." Clara stepped forward. "We're gathering people who will stand against the railroad. Your voice would carry weight, Nita. Would you join us?" The Comanche woman was quiet for a moment, considering. "My people know how paper promises can be broken," she said finally. "But we also know the strength of true allies." She met Clara's eyes. "I will speak for you. The elders remember Jebediah's honor. Perhaps together we can protect what belongs to all." The sun had climbed higher as they walked back to the lined shack. Boone prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, while Clara and Nita talked, sharing knowledge of local families who might join their cause. "Marcus Wheeler's spread borders Comanche grazing land," Nita noted. "He trades fairly with my people. He will listen." "The widow Chen's orchards depend on the creek water too," Clara added, spreading butter on her cornbread. "And Preacher Gray said she's already refusing to sell." Boone listened from his place by the stove, seeing how the pieces fit together. Railroads made enemies of folks who might never have been allies before, he observed. "Maybe that's their mistake." "Their greed blinds them," Nita said, rising to leave. "They see only what they can take, not what they destroy." She gathered her plants, now wrapped carefully in cloth. "I will speak with my elders. We will meet again soon." After Nita's departure, Clara and Boone sat in companionable silence, the magnitude of their task settling around them. The morning's shooting practice had built trust between them, and Nita's alliance had shown them the true scope of their fight. "We're not just protecting my claim anymore, are we?" Clara mused, resting her hand on her belly. "No," Boone agreed, his voice quiet but firm. "This is about all of us now, about doing what's right." Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Boone hitched the horses to his wagon. Clara emerged from the line shack carrying a basket of fresh biscuits she'd baked for their visits. Her determined expression matched the purpose in her stride. "Thompson's place first," Boone said, helping Clara onto the wagon seat. "They're losing stock daily from lack of water." The wagon wheels creaked as they set out across the valley. Morning mist still clung to the low spots, and meadowlarks called from fence posts. Clara smoothed her skirts, mentally rehearsing her appeal. The Thompson Ranch came into view, a modest spread with signs of strain. Dried-up water troughs stood empty, and thin cattle clustered in what shade they could find. Sarah Thompson hung washing, while her husband Joe worked at their failing well. "Morning, folks," Boone called out as they pulled up. Joe Thompson straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. His weathered face showed wariness at the unexpected visitors. "Hail." He nodded. "Mrs. McVeigh." Clara stepped down from the wagon, basket in hand. "We've brought breakfast, Mrs. Thompson," she called to Sarah, "and a matter to discuss, if you'll hear us out." Sarah's eyes brightened at the smell of fresh biscuits. "Come on in, then." "Joe, wash up and join us." Around the Thompsons' kitchen table, Clara laid out the railroad's pattern of water theft. She spread out maps showing how the company's diversions upstream were choking off traditional water routes. "My husband's water rights claim covers this entire watershed," Clara explained, pointing to the creek system. "If we stand together, we can fight their land grab legally." Joe frowned into his coffee cup. "Railroad's got deep pockets and fancy lawyers." "They do," Clara agreed, "but they don't have right on their side, or the support of folks who've worked this land for generations." "Way I see it," Boone added quietly. "We either stand together now or lose everything separately later." Sarah Thompson set her jaw. "Joe, remember what my daddy always said. Water's life out here. We can't let them steal our children's future." By the time they left, the Thompsons had joined their cause. The morning stretched into afternoon as they visited more homesteads. At the Morales Ranch, elderly Miguel and Elena listened intently as Clara explained their rights in careful Spanish. Their small adobe house was cool inside, decorated with carved saints and family photos. "The railroad men, they tell us we must sell," Elena said, serving strong coffee in delicate cups. "Say the water will stop coming anyway." "They're wrong," Clara assured her. "The law is clear about water rights. Together we can protect what's ours." Miguel nodded slowly, his lined face thoughtful. "In the old country, I saw what happens when rich men steal from poor men. But here," he gestured to the land outside, "here we still have a chance to fight." Word spread through the valley as the day wore on. At each stop, Clara's clear voice laid out the facts, while Boone's solid presence lent weight to their cause. His reputation as a fighter actually helped. Folks knew he wouldn't back down from a righteous fight. The sun was setting when they turned toward home. Clara's throat was dry from talking, but her eyes shone with triumph. "7 families," she said. "7 who'll stand with us. More will come," Boone replied. "You have a way of helping folks see what matters." Back at the line shack, Clara lit the lamp, while Boone tended to the horses. When he came in, she was already seated by the fire, his worn work shirt in her lap, and a needle in hand. "This tear needs mending," she said simply, threading the needle. Boone watched her work, her fingers sure and steady as she patched the frayed fabric. The lamplight caught golden glints in her hair, and her face held the same quiet determination he'd seen all day. This widow woman had shown more courage facing down the railroad than he'd ever shown with a gun. Her voice had swayed hard-bitten ranchers. Her intelligence had cut through fear and doubt. And here she sat, mending his shirt like it was the most natural thing in the world. Something shifted in Boone's chest, an easing of a burden he'd carried so long he'd forgotten its weight. All day he'd watched Clara build something he never could with his fists: hope, trust, community. The needle flashed in the lamplight as Clara tied off her neat stitches. Neither spoke, but the silence between them held a new comfort, born of shared purpose and growing respect. Outside, a coyote called to its mate across the darkening valley. Inside the line shack, 2 people who'd begun as enemies found themselves becoming something else entirely, partners in a cause bigger than either had imagined. The county clerk's office sat at the end of Main Street, a weathered building with peeling paint and crooked shutters. Dust motes danced in the shafts of morning light as Boone held the door for Clara. The floorboards creaked beneath their boots as they approached the high wooden counter. Clark Sims hunched over his ledger, his spectacles sliding down his nose. At their approach, he startled like a nervous rabbit, nearly knocking over his inkwell. "Mrs. McVeigh," he stammered, straightening his bow tie. "And Mr. Hale, what brings you to the clerk's office today?" Clara stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "We need to review the land records, Mr. Sims. Specifically, my late husband's deed and the recent railroad syndicate filings." Sims's thin fingers fidgeted with his pen. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Those records are rather sensitive, you see." Boone moved closer to the counter, his shadow falling across Sims's desk. "Seems to me public records ought to be public, Mr. Sims." The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Well, yes, technically." He glanced toward the window, as if checking for witnesses. "But the railroad's men, they've made it clear." "Mr. Sims," Clara interrupted gently, "you're a man of law and order. These records belong to the people. Will you help us?" Something in her tone reached him. Sims nodded quickly and disappeared into the back room. The shuffle of papers and creak of cabinet drawers filtered through the thin wall. He returned with an armload of leather-bound ledgers and loose papers, spreading them across the counter. "Here's everything from the past 5 years, but—" He lowered his voice. "You didn't hear this from me." Clara began methodically examining the documents while Boone kept watch by the door. Sims hovered nearby, wringing his hands. "Look at this," Clara murmured, pointing to a series of entries. "These claims are dated the same day, but the ink and handwriting don't match. And here, 3 different signatures from the same homesteader." Sims peered over her shoulder. "Yes, well, I've noticed some irregularities. The syndicate's man comes in weekly with new filings, always has a bottle of whiskey for the sheriff." "Bribes and forgeries," Boone growled from his post. Clara continued her examination, making careful notes in a small notebook. "Mr. Sims, I need copies of my husband's original deed and water rights claim." The clerk hesitated again, glancing between Clara and Boone. Boone stepped away from the door, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Sims, way I see it, a man's got 2 choices when facing wrong. He can hide from it, or he can help make it right." Sims stood straighter, something shifting in his nervous eyes. "Give me a moment." He disappeared again, returning with fresh papers and his copying pen. While Sims worked, Clara studied more records. The syndicate's been building this plan for months, buying claims, pressuring homesteaders, redirecting water rights. "Folks are scared," Boone said. "Railroad's got money and guns on their side." "And we have the truth," Clara replied, watching Sims finish the copies. The ride back to the line shack was quiet, both lost in thought as the wagon wheels turned. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. Clara broke the silence. "You didn't have to threaten Mr. Sims." "Wasn't a threat," Boone said. "Just a reminder about doing what's right." "Like you've been trying to do?" Clara's question was gentle but direct. Boone's hands tightened on the reins. For a long moment, only the creak of leather and jingle of harness filled the air. "Been 7 years since that day with Jeb," he finally said. "Spent every one of them trying to outrun being known as a killer, trying to prove I'm something else." His voice roughened. "But a man can't outrun his shadow." Clara touched his arm lightly. "I don't need you to outrun it, Boone. I need you to outlive it." He turned to her, surprised by the simple wisdom in her words. "The past is what it is," she continued, "but every day we choose who we're becoming. I've seen how you treat people, with respect, even when they fear you. That says more about who you are than any old story." Something eased in Boone's chest, a knot of guilt loosening under Clara's quiet absolution. She didn't offer false comfort or easy forgiveness. Instead, she saw him clearly, past and present, and still believed in his future. The wagon rolled on toward home, the valley spread out before them in the golden afternoon light. Behind them lay a town full of secrets and schemes. Ahead lay uncertainty and struggle. But in this moment, on this dusty trail, two people who'd begun as adversaries found themselves sharing something precious and rare: understanding. Word spread through town like wildfire. The railroad syndicate had called for a town hall meeting. Posters appeared overnight, promising a discussion of valley progress at the Dry Creek Meeting House. "More like a show of force," Boone muttered, studying one of the notices tacked to the general store's wall. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered boards. Clara adjusted her shawl against the autumn chill. "Then we'll be ready to meet it." They arrived early that evening, walking up the meeting house steps alongside the Thompsons, the Morales family, and other smallholders who'd pledged their support. Nita Red Elk and two tribal elders stood quietly near the back wall, their presence drawing suspicious glances from some townsfolk. Lantern light cast a warm glow over the packed room. Sheriff Lathrop lounged near the front, his badge gleaming as he toyed with his gun belt. Behind the simple podium stood Cyrus Talbot, the railroad foreman, pristine in his eastern suit despite the dusty surroundings. "Friends and neighbors," Talbot began, his smile practiced and cool. "We're gathered to discuss the bright future coming to our valley. The railroad brings progress, prosperity." "It brings theft and dried-up creeks," called out Old Man Thompson, earning murmurs of agreement from several corners. Talbot's smile tightened. "Change can be difficult, but I assure you the syndicate's plans are entirely legal." "Are they?" Clara's clear voice cut through the muttering crowd. She rose from her seat, one hand resting on her rounded belly, the other clutching a leather folder. "Because these records suggest otherwise." Boone watched her walk to the front, her steps measured and confident. Pride mingled with concern in his chest. They'd known this confrontation was coming, but seeing her face down Talbot and his men took rare courage. "Mrs. McVeigh," Talbot said smoothly, "I understand you're in a delicate condition. Perhaps we should discuss your concerns privately. These concerns belong to everyone here." Clara replied. She opened the folder, producing the copied deed. "This is my late husband's legal claim to the valley's water rights, filed and witnessed 3 years ago, before any railroad surveys crossed our land." Sheriff Lathrop straightened, his hand dropping to his holster. "Now see here." "Let her speak." Preacher Gray's weathered voice carried quiet authority. He stood from his bench, Bible in hand. "The lady has the floor." Clara held up the documents. "These water rights were granted not just to my husband, but to all legitimate settlers and native peoples who depend on the creek. The railroad's recent claims, which we can prove involve forged signatures and bribes, don't supersede these existing rights." Talbot's facade cracked slightly. "You're making serious accusations, madam. The syndicate doesn't take kindly to slander." "Truth ain't slander," Boone rumbled, standing to his full height. Others rose with him, the Thompsons, the Morales family, Nita Red Elk, and her people. Clara's voice remained steady. "We're not here to fight, Mr. Talbot. We're here to defend what's lawfully ours. This valley survives on cooperation, not corruption." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Townspeople who'd been watching silently began nodding, looking at their neighbors with dawning understanding. "This is absurd," Talbot snapped. "Sheriff, these people are disrupting a peaceful meeting." "Seems to me they're just stating facts." Preacher Gray interrupted, moving to stand beside Clara. "Facts that deserve a proper hearing in court, I'd say." Sheriff Lathrop glanced uneasily between Talbot and the growing number of standing townspeople. His hand slowly dropped from his gun. Talbot straightened his vest, regaining his composure. "Very well. The syndicate will delay further development while these claims are examined, but make no mistake, progress cannot be stopped by a few stubborn holdouts." "We ain't stopping progress," Clara replied. "We're protecting what matters. Our homes, our water, our community." The meeting dispersed into clusters of excited conversation. Clara found herself surrounded by townspeople offering support, many who'd been hesitant before now speaking up with their own stories of railroad pressure. Boone kept a watchful eye on Talbot and the sheriff as they hurried out, heads bent in angry discussion. He knew this small victory would have consequences. The railroad wouldn't back down easily. Later that evening, as their wagon creaked homeward under a star-filled sky, Clara finally allowed herself to tremble slightly. "I wasn't sure anyone would listen." "You made them listen," Boone said quietly. "Spoke truth plain and clear, just like you do with your students." "We all did," she corrected him. "Having everyone stand together, that's what turned the tide." Boone nodded, but his eyes scanned the darkened trail ahead. The railroad had been dealt a setback tonight, but men like Talbot didn't accept defeat gracefully. Whatever came next would test their newfound alliance to its limits. The autumn days grew shorter, and Clara's belly grew more prominent beneath her loose dresses. She tied her apron strings a little looser each morning, but her determination never wavered. From sunrise to sunset, she rode alongside Boone, helping coordinate water access among the valley's scattered ranches. "The Morales East pasture needs attention," she said one morning, consulting her careful notes. "Their cattle haven't had proper water access since the railroad diverted their stream." Boone watched her mounting her horse, noting how she adjusted her seat to accommodate her changing shape. "You ought to rest more," he suggested, his gruff voice carrying an undercurrent of concern. Clara's eyes sparkled with gentle defiance. "I'll rest when winter comes. For now, there's work to be done." They spent that day helping Old Man Morales dig a new irrigation channel, Boone's powerful shoulders leading the work, while Clara calculated the grade needed for proper water flow. The elderly rancher's gratitude showed in the way he pressed fresh tortillas into their hands at day's end. Back at the line shack, Boone's preparations were quieter but no less constant. He reinforced the door hinges, stockpiled ammunition, and cleared shooting lanes through the surrounding brush. Clara noticed but said nothing, understanding the necessity of such precautions. The telegram arrived at dusk, delivered by young Tommy Wheeler, who'd ridden hard from the telegraph office. Clara unfolded the yellow paper with trembling fingers, while Boone lit the evening lamp. "Securing additional personnel to resolve ongoing disputes," she read aloud. "Expect arrival within fortnight. It's addressed to Sheriff Lathrop." "Hired guns," Boone translated grimly. "Tommy, who else knows about this?" The boy shifted nervously. "Just my pa at the telegraph office." He thought folks ought to know. After Tommy left, Boone retrieved his Winchester rifle from its place above the door. "Time you learned to handle something with more reach than that revolver." Clara nodded, her face pale but determined in the lamplight. They walked out to where Boone had set up targets, tin cans on fence posts, visible in the dying light. "Stock goes firm against your shoulder," Boone demonstrated, his large hands gentle as he positioned the rifle. "Breath out slow when you squeeze the trigger." The rifle's report echoed across the valley. Clara's first shots went wide, but she persisted, following Boone's patient instruction. As the stars began appearing overhead, she was hitting more targets than she missed. "You're a natural," Boone said, his usual stoicism softening with pride. Later that night, they sat by a small campfire outside the shack. Clara wrapped herself in a borrowed blanket, watching the flames dance. The weight of the day's news and the rifle practice had stirred something deep inside her. "Boone," she said softly, her voice barely carrying above the crackling fire. "Do you believe men like you can ever find peace?" The big man stared into the fire for a long moment. His weathered face showed the weight of years spent carrying guilt and violence. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I reckon peace is something you build with your own hands," he said. "Like that irrigation ditch today. Takes work, planning." He paused, adding another stick to the fire. "And sometimes you need help to build it right." Clara's breath caught at the unspoken meaning in his words. She studied his profile in the firelight. The strong jaw, the eyes that had seen so much hardship, yet still held kindness. The same hands that had taught her to shoot today had spent hours helping neighbors, protecting her, building something new from the ashes of their shared tragedy. "I believe that," she whispered. "I believe in building peace." Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's movement. "In building a future." Boone turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the starlight above. Something unspoken passed between them, delicate as morning frost and just as transformative. Clara felt her heart beating faster, aware of how close they sat, how the night seemed to wrap around them like a protective blanket. The moment stretched, filled with possibilities neither dared to name. Then a coyote called in the distance, breaking the spell. Boone cleared his throat and stood, offering his hand to help Clara up. "Best get some rest," he said gruffly, but his touch lingered as she rose. "More work tomorrow." Clara nodded, gathering the blanket closer. As they walked back to the shack, she felt the warmth of the evening's conversation wrap around her heart, more comforting than any blanket. Whatever storms the railroad's men might bring, she knew now that she wasn't facing them alone. Behind them, the campfire slowly dimmed to embers, sending sparks up to join the stars wheeling overhead. The night air carried the scent of sage and the promise of change, as two souls who'd been brought together by tragedy began to recognize the possibility of something more. A week of preparation and planning had passed when Boone guided his wagon along the winding trail to Nita Red Elk's encampment. The morning sun cast long shadows through the cottonwoods as they approached the cluster of lodges nestled against the foothills. Clara sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded protectively over her growing belly. Nita emerged from her lodge as they drew near, her silver-streaked hair bound in traditional braids. She raised her hand in greeting, her weathered face creasing with a warm smile. "Welcome, friends," she said, helping Clara down from the wagon. "The elders are waiting." Boone hung back respectfully as Nita led Clara toward the central fire pit, where 3 elderly men and 2 women sat in dignified silence. Their faces bore the deep lines of wisdom earned through decades of protecting their people's ways. Clara lowered herself carefully onto an offered blanket, inclining her head in respect. Nita settled beside her as translator, though several of the elders spoke English well enough. Whitehawk, the eldest, spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of years. "We remember your husband, Jebediah McVeigh. He understood the meaning of honor." Through Nita's translation, the elders shared stories of the water-sharing agreements Jeb had made. They spoke of how he had respected their ancient water sources, ensuring his cattle never fouled the sacred springs, of how he had defended their rights when others would have driven them away. Clara listened intently, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When the elders finished, she spoke softly but clearly. "My husband believed in doing what was right, not what was easy. I give you my word, as long as I draw breath, the valley's water will flow freely for all who respect it. Your people's rights will be honored, just as Jeb promised." Boone watched from his position near the wagon as Whitehawk nodded slowly, approval evident in his expression. The eldest woman, Gray Sister, reached into a beaded pouch and withdrew a smooth river stone, its surface etched with ancient symbols. Nita beckoned Boone forward. "This stone represents shared guardianship," she explained as Gray Sister placed it in his large hands. "It means you are trusted to protect both the water and those who depend on it." Boone's fingers closed carefully around the stone, feeling its cool weight. "I aim to prove worthy of that trust," he said quietly. The ceremony concluded with shared cups of herb tea and a blessing from the elders. As they prepared to leave, Clara rose too quickly. She swayed, her face suddenly pale. "Clara!" Boone was at her side in 2 strides, his hand steadying her elbow. "Just a little light-headed," she murmured, but her legs trembled beneath her. Without hesitation, Boone swept her into his arms. She felt small and fragile against his chest, her head falling naturally against his shoulder. Nita hurried forward with concern, pressing a hand to Clara's forehead. "She has fever," Nita announced. "The baby draws much strength. She needs rest." Boone carried Clara to the wagon, lifting her onto the seat as gently as if she were made of spun glass. Nita pressed a small packet of herbs into his hand. "Make tea from these. It will help." The ride home was slow and careful, with Boone steering the wagon around every bump and rut. Clara drifted in and out of awareness, occasionally murmuring about water rights and promises. Each time, Boone's arm would tighten around her, keeping her secure against his side. At the line shack, he carried her inside and laid her on his cot, his roughened hands surprisingly tender as he tucked a blanket around her. The lamplight cast soft shadows as he stoked up the fire and set water to boil for Nita's tea. Clara stirred restlessly, her hair damp with fever. Boone found a clean cloth, dipped it in cool water, and began gently bathing her face and neck. His big hands, so capable with rope and reins, moved with extraordinary care as he brushed stray strands of hair back from her forehead. "You don't have to nurse me," Clara protested weakly. "Hush now," Boone replied, his gruff voice softened with concern. "Let someone else do the caring for once." He continued his ministrations as the evening deepened, watching over her with unwavering attention. When she shivered, he added another blanket. When she burned with fever, he replaced the cool cloth on her forehead. His calloused fingers moved with infinite gentleness, betraying feelings he'd hardly admitted to himself. In the quiet of the lamp-lit cabin, something shifted between them. Each tender touch, each worried glance when Clara's breath caught, each careful adjustment of blankets, all spoke of emotions deeper than mere duty or obligation. Boone's protective instincts had awakened something more, something that made his heart ache when she turned her feverish face into his palm. The morning sun filtered through the line shack's window as Clara spread documents across Boone's rough-hewn table. Preacher Gray sat beside her, his wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose as he carefully reviewed their draft petition. Boone stood near the door, keeping watch while occasionally glancing at their progress. "We need to make the language clear and direct," Preacher Gray said, dipping his pen in ink. "The federal land agents must understand how the railroad's actions violate existing claims." Clara nodded, one hand absently rubbing her growing belly as she leaned forward. "I've gathered testimonies from 12 families so far. Each one details how the railroad's water diversions have affected their livelihoods." Boone moved to the window, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. "Word is the railroad's hired guns are due within the week." "All the more reason to strengthen our legal position," Clara replied, sorting through the stack of papers. "Every signature represents another voice they can't ignore." Throughout the morning, a steady stream of townsfolk made their way to the line shack. Some came openly, others slipped in through the back way, but each added their name to the petition. The Thompson family brought fresh bread and stayed to share their story of the railroad's threats. Old Mrs. Morales arrived with her grandson to translate, her shaking hand making an X that carried as much weight as any signature. By afternoon, the petition bore 38 names. Preacher Gray's aged fingers traced each one with pride. "This here's more than just paper and ink," he said. "It's proof that folks still believe in standing together." Clara was copying the final draft when they heard horses approaching. Boone stepped onto the porch, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun, but stopping short. Through the dust, he recognized Wade Benson, one of Sheriff Lathrop's deputies, really just a hired thug with a tin star. "Heard you've been causing trouble, Hale," Benson called out, dismounting with 3 other men. "Sheriff says maybe you need reminding about how things work in this valley." Boone's jaw tightened, but his hand stayed loose at his sides. "This is private property, Benson." Inside, Clara moved toward the door, but Preacher Gray gently held her back. "Let him handle this," he whispered. "Watch." Benson swaggered forward, spitting tobacco juice near Boone's boots. "Ain't so tough without your gun, are you? Been hearing how you've gone soft, taking up with some dead man's widow." The first punch caught Boone in the ribs. He absorbed it without flinching, making no move to fight back. The second blow snapped his head to the side, splitting his lip. "Fight back!" Benson taunted, landing another hit. "Show us what kind of killer you really are." Blood trickled down Boone's chin, but his voice remained steady. "I ain't that man anymore." The beating continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Boone took every blow, refusing to raise his fists. Finally, frustrated by his lack of resistance, Benson and his men withdrew, leaving Boone braced against a porch post. Clara burst through the door as soon as they rode away, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she demanded, helping Boone inside. "Why didn't you fight back?" Preacher Gray brought water and clean cloths while Clara eased Boone into a chair. His face was already swelling, and his breathing came in shallow gasps that suggested bruised ribs. "Violence begets violence," Preacher Gray said softly, watching Clara tend to Boone's wounds. "Sometimes the strongest stand a man can make is choosing not to fight." Clara's hands trembled as she cleaned the blood from Boone's face. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't come here to break you. I came here to stand with you." Boone's rough fingers caught her wrist, stilling her movements. "You ain't breaking me, Clara. You're helping me become the man I should have been all along." Preacher Gray gathered the petition papers, tucking them safely in his coat. "I'll take these to my church for safekeeping. What happened here today? It proves we're on the right path. The sheriff wouldn't be sending his men if we weren't making a difference." After the preacher left, Clara continued tending to Boone's injuries, her touch gentle as she applied salve to his bruises. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "Your husband," Boone said quietly. "He would have been proud of what you're doing." Clara's hands stilled. "Sometimes I wonder if he can see us. If he knows I'm trying to protect everything he believed in." "He sees," Boone replied, his voice rough with emotion. "And so does every person who signed that petition today. We ain't alone in this fight anymore." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set, each lost in thought about the days ahead. The petition represented hope, not just for Clara's claim or Boone's redemption, but for an entire community standing together against injustice. And Boone's bruises, earned without throwing a single punch, marked a turning point that would ripple through the valley like water over stone. Dawn painted the horizon in pale orange when the first wisps of smoke curled into the morning sky. Clara woke to the acrid scent filling her lungs, her eyes stinging as she stumbled from the cot. "Boone!" she called out, coughing. Flames already licked up the line shack's outer walls, hungry tongues of fire consuming the dried timber. Boone burst through the bedroom door, his shirt hastily thrown on. "Out! Now!" He grabbed Clara's arm, guiding her through the thickening smoke. They stumbled onto the porch just as the roof timbers began to crack. Clara clutched her belly protectively, watching in horror as the flames devoured the only home she'd known since Jeb's death. Boone disappeared back inside for a heart-stopping moment, emerging with her satchel containing the precious water rights deed. The morning air filled with the terrible sound of splitting wood and Clara's broken sobs. Tears streaked clean lines down her smoke-stained cheeks as Boone's lifetime of possessions, his brother's photo, his father's Bible, every memory and memento, turned to ash before their eyes. Heavy hoofbeats approached through the morning mist. Sheriff Lathrop appeared with 4 deputies, their badges gleaming in the firelight. "Boone Hale," Lathrop called out, his voice carrying false authority. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Wade." "What murder?" Clara demanded, stepping forward despite Boone's protective arm. "This is nothing but railroad thuggery." Lathrop smiled coldly. "Wade's body was found this morning. Witnesses place Hale at the scene last night." He turned to Clara. "Of course, if certain documents were to find their way to my office within 24 hours, new evidence might surface. Evidence that clears Mr. Hale. Boone stood quietly as the deputies shackled him, his eyes meeting Clara's with quiet intensity. They both knew Wade, a railroad worker, had been alive and well yesterday afternoon. By midday, Clara sat in Preacher Gray's parlor, her hands trembling around a cup of cold tea. The old preacher watched her with concern as she stared at the blank telegram form before her. "They want me to choose," she whispered. "The water rights or Boone's freedom." Preacher Gray's weathered hand covered hers. "What does your heart tell you?" Clara straightened, her chin lifting with determination. "That I won't let them win through lies and intimidation." She picked up her pen, beginning to write. "I'm sending for Federal Land Agent Harrison. It's time everyone sees the truth of what's happening in this valley." The telegram would cost nearly all her remaining coins, but Clara's hand was steady as she wrote. Outside, smoke still rose from the ruins of the line shack, a dark reminder of all they had to lose and all they had left to fight for. Morning painted the town in soft golden light as hoofbeats echoed down the main street. Nita Red Elk rode at the head of her band, her bearing regal atop her painted horse. Behind her, 24 Comanche warriors moved in dignified formation, their presence commanding respect rather than fear. From the North Road, wagons rolled in carrying the Thompson family and their neighbors. The Morales clan walked up from their homestead to the south, gray-haired Elena Morales leaning on her son's arm. More townsfolk emerged from their homes and shops, drawn by the gathering crowd. Sheriff Lathrop burst from his office, hand hovering near his gun belt. His confident swagger faltered at the sight of so many faces, settlers and Comanche alike, united in silent witness. His deputies shifted uneasily, outnumbered by the peaceful assembly. Clara stood on the general store's porch, her pregnant form straight and proud. The morning breeze carried her clear voice across the crowd. "We gather today not as enemies but as neighbors. This valley's water gives life to all our children, waters all our crops, sustains all our hopes." Preacher Gray stepped forward, a leather-bound ledger tucked under his arm. His aged voice rang with authority. "Sheriff Lathrop, I hold here records of every bribe paid by the railroad, every forged deed, every threatened homesteader." He opened the book, displaying columns of damning figures. "The Lord sees all, and now so shall the territory judge." The sheriff's face drained of color as whispers rippled through the crowd. The sound of an approaching carriage cut through the murmurs. Cyrus Talbot, the railroad's foreman, pulled up in his polished buggy, expecting to find a town cowed into submission. Instead, he faced a wall of humanity. Ranchers stood shoulder to shoulder with shopkeepers. Comanche warriors mixed freely with settler families. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, watching history unfold. Clara's voice rose again, steady and clear as a church bell. "This land was promised to all who would work it with honest hands. My husband died believing in that promise. I stand here today, carrying his child, to ensure that promise lives on, not just for my baby, but for every child who will call this valley home." Nita Red Elk dismounted, walking to stand beside Clara. The two women faced Talbot together, their unity a powerful symbol that transcended boundaries of culture and circumstance. The foreman's usual smug expression crumbled as he realized his carefully laid plans had been undone by something he had never counted on, the strength of a community standing as one. Sheriff Lathrop emerged from the jailhouse, keys jangling in his trembling hands. "Federal investigation would ruin us all," he muttered, unlocking Boone's cell. The big man rose slowly, his bruised frame straightening to its full height as he stepped into the morning light. Clara stood waiting on the boardwalk, her face drawn with exhaustion from sleepless nights. Yet her eyes shone with quiet triumph, and something deeper that made Boone's heart quicken. The crowd parted as he walked toward her, no longer the solitary figure who'd kept to the shadows of his line shack. Cyrus Talbot paced near his carriage, his careful facade crumbling as he watched his hired guns mounting up. "This isn't over!" he spat, but the venom in his voice couldn't mask his defeat. One by one, His enforcers rode out, leaving only dust devils dancing in their wake. "Miss Clara," Boone said softly, stopping before her. His voice carried across the hushed gathering, no longer weighed down by guilt and shame. "Reckon I owe you more than I can say." Clara's hand found his, fingers intertwining without hesitation. "You don't owe me anything, Boone Hale. What you gave freely." The townsfolk watched, their earlier suspicion melting into something like wonder. Here stood the man they'd labeled a killer, and the widow of the man he'd shot, their joined hands bridging a chasm of grief and redemption. Nita Red Elk smiled knowingly from atop her horse. Preacher Gray clutched his Bible, nodding in quiet approval. Even Sheriff Lathrop looked away, unable to face the simple power of their unity. "Walk with me," Boone asked, and Clara nodded. Together they moved down the street toward the blackened remains of the line shack. The morning sun painted long shadows before them, but for once, Boone didn't seek their shelter. At the edge of town, where the prairie grass swayed in the breeze, Boone stopped. His large, calloused hand still held Clara's smaller one with infinite gentleness. "Been thinking," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "about peace, and how a man builds it." Clara turned to face him, her free hand resting on her swelling belly. "I'll build you a home, Clara McVeigh," Boone said, the words carrying all the weight of a sacred vow. "If you'll have me." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she nodded, her smile brighter than the rising sun. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." In that moment, standing together on the edge of town, they were no longer the killer and the widow, but simply a man and a woman choosing to build something new from the ashes of the past. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of fresh-cut lumber and new beginnings as townsfolk gathered before the rebuilt schoolhouse. Its whitewashed walls gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to what determined hands could build when hearts worked as one. Clara Hale stood at the top of the steps, cradling 2-week-old James Jebediah Hale against her chest. The infant's soft coos mingled with the murmur of the crowd below. Beside her, Boone's towering presence offered steady comfort, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. Nita Red Elk and her people stood proudly among the settlers, their traditional garments adding rich color to the sea of Sunday best. The old water-sharing agreements, now formally recorded and witnessed, lay sealed in the schoolhouse cornerstone, a foundation of trust for generations to come. Preacher Gray's weathered Bible creaked as he opened it, his voice carrying across the gathered faces. "This place," he proclaimed, "stands as more than timber and nails. It stands as proof that mercy outweighs vengeance, that understanding defeats fear." The morning light caught the silver of Clara's wedding band as she adjusted little James's blanket. The ring was simple, like their courthouse ceremony 3 weeks prior, but its meaning ran deeper than any fancy trappings could express. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but they were different now. Gone were the dark murmurs of "killer" that had once followed Boone. Instead, folks spoke of how he'd helped raise the schoolhouse walls, how he'd dug new irrigation channels that served both settler and native lands alike. "Let us bless this gathering," Preacher Gray continued, "and the peace that grows in this valley like winter wheat, steady, strong, and sure." His words drew amens from the crowd, backed by approving nods from Nita's tribal elders. Boone leaned down, his lips close to Clara's ear. "You said you needed a home?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Turns out I did too." Clara leaned into him, their son sleeping peacefully between them. The new schoolhouse bell rang out across the valley, its clear tone echoing off the distant hills. Children laughed, racing around the fresh-painted fence posts. Nita shared knowing smiles with Clara, their friendship a bridge between worlds. The air itself seemed lighter, as if the land itself approved of the harmony taking root. Boone watched it all, this unlikely family he'd found, not just Clara and their son, but the whole patchwork of people who'd chosen to stand together when it mattered most. His hand found Clara's free one, and together they faced their valley's new dawn, secured by the courage of those who'd dared to believe in better days. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.